Hello and welcome to part 2 of Lrn2Tank. My name is Kitten, or RK, and I am chilling with my pal Loganaar, Moonglade's resident druid trainer, who is going to help with today's discussion of what specifically turns a druid into a tank, our talents and glyphs. I will discuss each talent within the Feral combat tree, explaining its strengths or weaknesses for bear form, and will also point out which talents you absolutely must have and which are completely useless. Please note that this lesson will focus specifically on the needs of those whose only focus is tanking. I will discuss the potentials of a hybrid build in a later lesson. Feral Druids are unique among the tanking classes not only for our spurning of heavy armor, but also for our talent tree being shared by tanks and DPS alike. Many talents provide an either-or situation, depending on your form at any given time, while others are specifically for cat, specifically for bear, or apply to both forms equally. Each ability will have a ranking. 3 means that the talent is essential for feral tanking, and any feral tanking spec will have this ability. 2 means the ability is strong and should generally be obtained unless you absolutely need the points elsewhere. 1 means the ability is extremely situational or only of minor benefit. That's not to say that it's not a bad talent, it just may not be one that you have all of the time. 0, of course, means the ability is useless, generally because it's actually for cat form. The higher the number, the stronger the talent. By selecting the Feral combat tree, you immediately gain access to the Mangle spell, a 25% increase to attack power, the Vengeance ability, and the Mastery Savage Defense ability. This is in addition to 2 cat-specific abilities, their Mastery Razor Claws and Feral Instinct. Mangle is our main threat builder for bears, and you'll be hitting this button every time it's available. The increase to attack power and to vengeance helps our threat, and both of those plus the mastery bonus directly affect the size of our bear bubbles, known as savage defense. Tier 1 Feral talents. Feral Swiftness increases your dodge by 2% per point. Aside from stealing picnic baskets, dodging is what bears do best. We don't have parry or a true block like the shield users, so if we don't want to take damage, we generally want to dodge. This is a 3 out of 3 talent. Fur gives you a 33% chance per point to start with 10 rage when you shift into bear form. All of our abilities require rage to use them, so every little bit you can get off of the pool helps. This is a 2 out of 3 talent, however there are no other point options for Tier 1 and we have to use 5 points here to move on to the next tier, so you'll be taking this ability regardless. Predatory Strikes is a cat-only talent, increasing your ravage damage and allowing for instant cast heals and rebirths when using finishing moves. This is not a necessary talent for a feral build, and is a 0 of 3. Tier 2 Feral talents. Infected Wounds reduces target's movement and or attack speed by 25% per point for movement and 10% per point for their attack speed. The slower a mob swings, the more times healer have to react, and of course the less damage you're going to take over the course of a fight. However, Death Knights of all specs come pre-equipped with this attack speed debuff through the use of their Frost Fever ability, which they will keep up on their target 100% of the time. If you are raiding in 10-man or 25-man raids and will always have 1, 2, or even 10 Death Knights around, this talent is extremely situational and becomes a 1 out of 3. However, if your focus is on 5-mans, or you raid without a DK, or if every once in a while you get stuck on ad duty off in the corner all by yourself, you're definitely going to want this ability, and it becomes a 3 out of 3 talent. Furious Swipes gives your auto attacks a chance to proc extra attacks. This provides more damage and threat overall, which makes this a 2 out of 3 talent. Primal Fury. This gives us a chance of 50% per point to gain 5 rage whenever we critically hit. More rage, of course, means more threat and the use of more abilities, and due to the nature of agility and our love affair with critical strike rating for savage defense, we generally crit a lot. This is a 2 out of 3 talent. Feral Aggression applies an extra stack of Fairy Fire for every point invested. This does not give the damage of a second or third Fairy Fire, so it does not directly increase your threat. However, if you pull a mob with Fairy Fire, this creature now has 3 stacks of the armor debuff right off the bat, which means they're going to take extra damage from your abilities. This is really a quality of life improvement more than anything, and is a situational ability at 1 out of 3. Tier 3 talents. King of the Jungle increases your damage while enraged by 5% per point. With the changes in the 4.1 patch, Enrage no longer increases the amount of damage that we take while active, so we tend to use it on cooldown. Because of this, the extra damage that you'll do during Enrage is extremely useful, especially off the pull, since we tend to pop Enrage in order to build up threat as quickly as possible. This becomes a 2 out of 3. Feral Charge allows you to charge enemies. Arriving first generally means that you'll get the first chance to smack an enemy upside the head, and thus you'll have a better chance of establishing aggro. The stun is nice, but a lot of mobs, even heroic dungeons, let alone raids, are immune to it. If a mob runs off toward the healer, turning and charging is a great way to reach it. Bash it, and then re-establish your threat. This is a very strong quality of life talent. Could you live without it? Maybe, but that'd kind of be like living without chocolate. So technically it would be a 2 out of 3, but my personal recommendation is that you want this talent. Stampede increases your melee haste for 8 seconds once you've successfully charged a mob. Melee haste gives us faster white swing damage, which means that you have more potential procs of fury swipes or possible critical attacks, which can proc savage defense. That said, haste in general is an extremely weak stat for bears. If you're having trouble with initial threat, this may be a talent for consideration, but generally your points are better used elsewhere, giving this a 1 out of 3. Thick Hide is one of the 2 abilities that makes your Feral spec a tanking spec. For every point you gain a metric ass ton of armor, and you reduce your chance to be critically hit. All 3 points in Thick Hide makes you that magical crit immune number that we wanted back in Wrath by stacking defense. If you do not have this talent, expect to be insta-gibbed from criticals and then pointed and laughed at. This is a 3 out of 3 talent. Tier 4 talents. Leader of the Pack provides a 5% crit buff to your entire group or raid. Just like infected wounds, this buff can also be provided by other classes. However, Leader of the Pack also provides you with the occasional self-heal. My personal logs show roughly 7k healing on average every 9 seconds. It's not an amazing amount by any count, but every little bit helps, especially on fights like Chimeron. If you aren't required to provide the buff and you don't find the self-healing to be all that great, you can always drop this talent for another, making this either a 1 out of 3 or a 2 out of 3, depending on your personal preference. Brutal Impact reduces the cooldown of our Interrupt, Skull Bash, and our Stun, Bash. Yeah, it's easy to get the 2 confused. Most of the fights are reliant, or at least suggestive, of the tank also being a valid interrupter, which is why Blizzard recently made interrupts impossible to miss. This is especially the case in 10-man raiding, but by forcing a DPS to peel off to the boss in order to keep up interrupts on another target is an overall DPS loss to the raid. For dungeons, however, the chance of your group mates having even removed their interrupt buttons from their spellbook can be fairly slim. Many times it's better to simply take the mantle upon yourself and make sure to interrupt the most important things. If you are never, ever, 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 ever expected to interrupt anything at all, then this talent can be dropped. So it's either a 3 or a 0. You either need it or you don't. Nurturing Instinct makes our heals significantly stronger. And Agility to Spell Power conversion is pretty crazy. The problem is that we don't have much mana to throw around. If your Tranquility will make or break the survival of a feud in which you're not tanking, or your platform needs more oomph from your heals once your ad is dead, this could be the talent for you. Aside from extremely strong Tranquilities every 10 minutes and the 3 other heals you can drop before you've barely got enough mana left to shift, this is really not a great talent for Bear. It is, however, amazing for cat form. 1 out of 3. Tier 5 talents. Primal Madness gives you extra rage when you use Berserker and Rage. For 2 points, you get 12 rage every minute and another 12 rage every 3 minutes. This really is not worth the 2 talent points. If you are truly having rage issues off of the pool, you might want to try some Mighty Rage potions instead. That said, it does provide a very minor benefit, so I'm going to give this a 0.1 out of 3. Survival Instincts is the feral equivalent of Shield Wall. Many fights are designed around the use of our cooldowns at specific times, and even for those that aren't, 50% less damage for 12 seconds is really nothing to sneeze at. You want this talent. It's a 3 out of 3. Endless Carnage increases the duration of our Pulverize from 10 seconds to up to 18 seconds, depending on how many points you've invested. Not having to babysit the buff quite as often means you can use more abilities in between refreshes. And trust me, you will be pulverizing. This is a huge quality of life talent, but it's not completely necessary. You'll live without it if you have to. It's a 2 out of 3. Natural Reaction is the second of the 2 major talents that denotes the DPS from the Feral tanks in the Feral combat tree. 12% less damage taken, 6% more dodge, and 3 rage every time we successfully dodge. If you call yourself a bear, you want this talent. It is a 3 out of 3. Tier 6 talents. Blood in the Water is a cat-only talent. If you're interested in a hybrid spec, this is a really strong contender. But for general tanking, you can ignore this completely and use your points elsewhere. 0 out of 3. Rend and Tear. This increases the damage of our Rage Dump Maul when we hit a target that is already bleeding. Now, the bleeds don't necessarily have to be your own. They can also be applied by other Feral Druids as well as warriors. Also, Rend and Tear is the prerequisite for Pulverize, and you want Pulverize. Therefore, all 3 ranks of this talent are a 3 out of 3. Pulverize gives us up to 9% extra crit after consuming your stacks of Lacerate. Bear Bubbles, Rage Generation, and our self-heals are all triggered from crits, so an extra 9% chance to potentially trigger those is a very good thing. Much of the bear rotation is based on maining this buff as much as possible, and is one of the key things that keeps us from truly being a rotation-based class rather than and instead we are a priority-based class. Berserk, our top tier talent for Feral, is the other reason why we generally have what's called a priority system instead of a rotation. It has both an active and a passive component for bear tanks. Actively, it is a 3-minute cooldown that gives our Mangle ability no cooldown and allows it to hit up to 3 enemies instead of the normal 1 for 15 seconds. This is an amazing threat build for both single and multi-target tanking. Passively, it allows our Lacerate ticks to refresh our ability to Mangle. As Mangle is our main attack, we want to be able to use it as often as possible. This is the reason why we don't have a rotation. We can't know exactly when Berserk is going to proc. Even though it's annoying, you definitely want this ability, and it's a 3 out of 3. The balance tree doesn't offer any feral talents in tier 1 or 2, so don't worry about spending your extra points there. Instead, we're going to turn our attention to the restoration tree. The restoration tree doesn't provide a lot of options. The choices that you're going to want from there as a Feral Druid are pretty cut and dry. Tier 1 restoration talents. Natural Shapeshifter is a prerequisite for the Master Shapeshifter ability in Tier 2, and is the only arguably useful way to get to that second tier of talents. Since you want Perseverance, this is a 3 out of 3. Whether or not you actually want Master Shapeshifter doesn't have a lot to do with it. You want Perseverance. Heart of the Wild increases your stamina. Regardless of your views on stamina in general, 6% extra stamina is quite nice, and this is the only other useful Tier 1 restoration talent. Since you definitely want Perseverance, this is a 3 out of 3. Tier 2 restoration talents. Perseverance reduces the amount of magic damage we take by 6%. 6 freaking percent! That gives us the most passive magic damage reduction in the game. Combine that with an Effulgence Shadow Spirit Diamond and the Mirror Broken Images trinket, and we are beasts at handling magic heavy fights. This is a 3 out of 3 talent. Master Shapeshifter grants different buffs depending on your form. For Bear, we gain 4% extra physical damage done. Because this isn't an actual attack power boost, this helps not at all with any of our mitigation abilities, only with our threat. If you ever plan to hybrid, it is strong for cat form. Otherwise, you can really take it or leave it, making it a 1 out of 3. So those are all of the different talents that are available to you and that you may or may not consider using. In addition to talents, you have Glyphs. These atrociously expensive pieces of paper add extra functionality to all of our abilities and come in 3 flavors: Prime, Major, and Minor. Generally, Prime Glyphs affect our strongest abilities, Major Glyphs provide small bonuses to lesser used abilities, and Minor Glyphs are mostly flavor. There are only 3 Prime Glyph choices for the tanking Feral Druid. These are Berserk, which increases the duration of your Berserk ability by 5 seconds, translating into roughly 2 or 3 more mangles. This is excellent for the opening of a fight and extremely useful for burn phase during the fight. Lacerate. Lacerate gives your Lacerate ticks 5% more chance to crit. Lacerate ticks will trigger your Savage Defense, but will not trigger Leader of the Pack or Primal Fury. Regardless, this is an extremely strong ability to take for the Feral Tank. The third one is Mangle. Glyph of Mangle increases your Mangle damage by 10%. We are mangling every time it is off cooldown, so that extra damage is extremely useful for building threat and for bringing the boss down, a couple seconds quicker. Major Glyphs offer a little bit more variety. Fairy Fire increases the range of, our only real pulling ability by 10 yards. This is an extremely huge quality of life improvement. Feral Charge reduces the cooldown of Feral Charge by 1 second. This changes it from a 15-second cooldown to a whopping 14-second cooldown. Whoop-de-freaking-do? Glyph of Frenzy Regeneration changes the way that the similarly named ability actually functions. Rather than draining your red bar in order to fill your green one, a Glyph Frenzy Regen will instead increase the amount of healing you take by 30% for its duration. If you pug a lot, you may want to keep the Sun Glyph for emergencies. In those situations, it's probably only, a 1 out of 3 if we were to rank it on the talent scale. For raids, however, you want this glyph, definitely making it a requirement. The Maul glyph allows your Maul to hit an additional target for half damage. This is good in that it helps a bit with your AoE threat. However, it's bad because it can break CCs. However, generally, you've already broken your CCs anyhow with Thrash if you're close enough to have broken them with Maul. This is really strong for trash or dungeon runs, but it's really not useful for single target tanking fights. And Rebirth. While not necessarily a feral tanking glyph or a feral glyph in general, if you're ever not tanking for a portion of a fight and are going to be expected to use your Rebirth ability, you really want this glyph. Yes, Warlocks and Death Knights can now battle res as of 4.1, but they don't have an option to bring the target back with full health like Druids do. That said, we can't always Rebirth when it's needed, so it may actually be a waste of glyph space. Minor glyphs, well, there's really only one minor glyph that actually affects a bear ability, and that's the Glyph of Challenging Roar. This drops the cooldown from 3 minutes to 2.5 minutes. Is it awesome? Well, that's debatable. I've used it on Heroic Valiona and Thralian tank swapping transitions when Growl's on cooldown, but otherwise it's not that spectacular, especially since Challenging Roar on a group of mobs generally warrants a Survival Instinct or other cooldown just to survive it, and since Survival Instinct still has a 3-minute cooldown, it may not be ready yet. That's not to say that the other minor glyphs aren't awesome. I definitely love the Glyph of Dash, but they don't specifically affect your bear abilities, so feel free to pick whichever ones you feel are the strongest for you. So what would a basic, let's cover all of our bases feral tanking spec look like? Well, it'd look an awful lot like this one. I'll provide a link below as well, but this is very much what I would suggest to any starting Feral Druid tank. You'll notice that all of the required abilities in order to survive as a tank are taken, as well as most of the stronger quality of life abilities, including all of the buffs that you cannot necessarily rely on others being able to provide if you do pickup groups. This leaves you with one unspent talent point that you're welcome to spend in any way you'd like. Strong contenders are 1 point of King of the Jungle in order to give you a little bit of extra threat on a cooldown. Stampede is a little bit weaker, but a viable possibility. Or you can take Feral Aggression, which will increase the damage caused by your Ferocious Bite if you decide to switch in the cat form, and it applies that second stack of Fairy Fire, which allows you to do a little bit more damage off the pole. I personally suggest taking Nurturing Instinct simply because you will find many times, even in pickup groups, that there are opportunities for you to pop out, throw a heal, or even Tranquility, and it can really make the difference between living and dying. If you really don't want the Nurturing Instinct, then I would suggest just putting all 3 of those points into King of the Jungle and enjoying your little bit of extra threat. For glyphs, of course, you'll have the 3 main, Glyph of Mangle, Berserk, and Lacerate. You definitely want Frenzy Regeneration if you're raiding. If not, pick your poison. Glyph of Maul, which is really nice for dungeon and trash. And of course the Glyph of Fairy Fire, just so you can keep things moving. For miners, I suggest Glyph of Challenging Roar simply because when you need it, you need it. Glyph of Unburden Rebirth, so that you don't have to carry extra reagents in your bag, and the Glyph of Dash. There are a lot of fights where you need to get away quickly from something and you're not necessarily going to have a boss beating on you. So being able to shift into cat form, pop dash, and get away is extremely valuable. I hope that you've learned something or gained something out of this lesson, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. If you have any questions, please feel free to post a comment or just send me a private message on YouTube. Until then, take care.